Hello everyone, it's Mike Levin, Thursday, June 22nd, and heading into work. And I thought I'd talk today about that final push of getting over the hump from being a Python raw data pull guy. Give me a data source, I can pull it. Even with the challenges of OAuth 2 authentication with all of Google services, or the kooky bitmask API stuff of Mozscape API, and all the funky ways that you have to jump through hoops to connect to data sources or open files or what have you. Data comes from all different places, and I've dedicated a decent part of my recent career to being able to make sure I can connect to and pull the raw data feeds and store locally that same raw data feed for accountability purposes. And so now I'm at the point where I need to answer questions based on all that data. I've created the next generation of my mashup technology, which is a non-framework framework. It is it is finally being worn down to the fact that it's a bad idea to always invent yet another framework when the very language you're operating in brings 90% of what you need framework-wise to the picture. And it's just a shift in thinking, because you are writing code one way or the other. So are you writing code which you are going to think of as a framework, or the last mile expressiveness of what you're trying to achieve? And I'm definitely going to the later. And it seems also that this is melding with a trend that I've noticed definitely in my day-to-day behavior, just because of attrition, but also in the talk of people like Michael Kennedy with Talk Python to me, where, you know, everyone is trying to, not everyone, that's too broad of a generality, but there's a large portion of people who are trying to reduce the complexity of their code for many reasons: long-term maintenance, scalability, collaboration, the list goes on. And the more moving parts you have in there, and the more parts that have to be understood by and administrated by DevOps people, system administrators, network admins, the more fragile and brittle and less under your own direct control the overall application is. And so first step is to get a web server out of the picture, because so many people learn how to code these days using some sort of web server in the picture. When I got started, it was Apache, and I got Apache out of the picture. These days a lot of people are on Nginx. But Python has a web server built in if you need things to work in web server mode. So you shift to these other paradigms like, command line, scheduled. There's a whole bunch of execution contexts, ad hoc hitting run in Jupyter Notebook. So you switch your mental model to where you don't really need a web server in every case. And then the next thing you get rid of is a framework, because without your web server, suddenly you don't need your web framework. And you might look at other frameworks. There are indeed other frameworks that are useful, even if you're not doing web development. But once you took that big whopping web framework out of the picture, why put a framework back in the picture when you don't need one? So the next thing to go after taking a web server out is taking a framework out. And then the final step, and I could do a whole video just on this, is taking the database out. I would say, again, 80 to 90% of the uses that you would use a database for this day and age can be easily replaced by just local persistence through a whole variety of methods, of which Python gives you. And I'm personally just using the shelve API very frequently to pickle my data objects. There's something called NoDB that accomplishes this without the overhead of dealing with the shelve API, but it isn't really that hard. You just use open withs. So I'm getting a little bit geeky and technical, but Point is that in the process of repositioning myself in my career to do more things, to do more ad hoc things, to do more things that can be promoted to scheduling and can be promoted to enterprise scale reliability and data storage, I am taking the lightweight approach always first, and keeping in mind how I can decouple it from the lightweight things like pickled shelves and rewire it to things like Amazon S3 or Redis. And in this way, all your code is always very relevant. It doesn't require a lot of moving parts. It's mostly under your control. It doesn't require the support of your DevOps or sysadmin and network admin people. And it's less brittle. It runs better. It's easier to refactor when people have questions and you have to gut it and change, the flow or whatever. It's easier to do. So I thought I'd just sort of throw that out there now, because I'm at the phase where I'm getting over the hump where I pull all the data from all the various sources. Now I have to do very traditionally database things where it would be nice to have a SQL database in the picture, but I had a bunch of CSVs that I joined into a single CSV file with a very simple Python, CSV package append all these separate files that I did from different data pulls of different time periods, get sort of knit together into a single file. I take that single file, I load it into Pandas, and then I use the SQL package for Pandas, which is pretty easy to Google up. It's not part of the Anaconda default install, but someone on my YouTube video suggested I tried it, and I did a group by phrase to collapse all that CSV data that had too many rows into many fewer rows and aggregate sums, and there was not ever an actual SQL database in the picture. And I, am doing the type of work that in the past I could never have imagined being done without all these heavyweight tools and all these moving parts. So that's a real delight, and I need to master that process. I am relearning SQL under Pandas, under Python, and that will also I will also encourage myself to not rely on that SQL package, so I can do any of these things with either the SQL approach with my old knowledge, and with SQL knowledge which is never going away. It's, pee in the pool of tech. It's like Unix and Perl and a bunch of other things that are just so ingrained that they're not going away. SQL is one of those things, so there is always value in it, but I also want to learn the Pandas API, which seems to have certain advantages in thinking about the problem Pythonically, which is a topic which will come up more and more over the weeks and months as I do these videos. So anyway, thanks for joining me. Hope to talk to you soon, and don't forget to subscribe.